Hey, I'm Katie Elise, a life coach to fellow mamas with special and medical needs kids. I teach simple and doable ways to live your life with more intention, shifting away from caregiver burnout and towards the thriving life that you desire. I also share stories from real moms just like you because I believe that sharing and honoring our stories is essential to feeling less alone on this journey. This is the Thriving While Surviving podcast. Let's get started. Hello. Today I am going to talk about processing stressful emotions in a healthy way. We all probably know that it's important to process our emotions in a healthy way, but actually doing that can be pretty difficult, especially if we haven't been taught how to. Most of us have formed habits of the go-to ways that we cope with stressful emotions. I'm going to share some examples of coping mechanisms or ways that people deal with stress. So think of the cliche of dealing with the emotions from a breakup by eating large amounts of ice cream. One of my personal go-to coping mechanisms when I'm feeling overwhelmed is binge watching television shows to escape from reality. When our child is having a very public meltdown at the grocery store and we follow our instinct to flee by scooping up our child and leaving immediately. Or when our child is inpatient at the hospital and instead of feeling our feelings, we push them away and compartmentalize them so that we can focus on what the doctors are saying and what needs to happen next for your child. When we're feeling helpless and out of control when it comes to helping your child through their unique struggles. And so perhaps in an attempt to feel more control in our lives, we do a lot of online shopping to buy things that we think will make our life easier or make us feel better. Or think about when we're feeling frustrated at our partners and the ways that you don't necessarily agree on how to approach things with your child. So maybe you decide to go for a run or a workout to feel better. Sometimes we like to keep our schedules really busy and are always running from one activity to the next or overloading ourselves at work so that we don't have to slow down long enough to face difficult emotions. I want you to think for a moment. When you were listening to those examples, did you view those coping mechanisms as either good or bad? Let's for a moment think of coping mechanisms as neutral. When we stop to think about it, it's actually pretty amazing that our bodies have this built-in desire to protect ourselves and handle situations in our lives that cause us stress. If we think of coping mechanisms as not inherently good or bad, this obviously does not include any sort of coping mechanisms that cause harm to self or others. Then we can just think about our coping mechanisms as having natural results or consequences. When we view our coping mechanisms as solely good or bad, we end up missing the bigger picture. For example, staying really busy may feel good because you feel that you're being productive and maybe even using your busyness to help or serve others. There's nothing wrong in wanting to be productive and help others. But you also may be using your busyness to escape from facing your difficult emotions and processing them, and end up feeling burnt out because you aren't taking the necessary space to slow down and care for yourself. Or perhaps you turn to food when you are struggling emotionally, which serves its purpose of creating dopamine to help you feel better. But it ends up causing you to feel bad, both physically in your body because the food you chose isn't serving you nutritionally, and emotionally you might feel shame and spiral into a shame cycle. Does this mean that you should never indulge in a treat when you're feeling down? I don't think so. I think that being aware of the fact that we are wanting to indulge in a treat to cope with our feelings and then making a conscious decision of whether or not that's the way we want to deal with them is key. When we think about coping mechanisms from a more neutral standpoint, we get to stop and ask ourselves, does this coping mechanism serve me well in the short term? Does it serve me well in the long term? Is there an alternative coping mechanism that I can begin to practice that better serves me? Maybe there's a different way I can get the dopamine that I'm seeking that has better long-term natural consequences. Maybe I can still be productive and serve others and show up for my family without running myself into the ground. Maybe I can make space for myself to process my emotions instead of letting them build up inside of me to explode later or make myself sick. Chronic stress has been linked to conditions like cardiovascular disease, immune system suppression, and other various illnesses. I think that choosing to have grace with ourselves, cultivating awareness around what our coping mechanisms are and how they are and aren't serving us, and taking steps towards intentionally choosing coping mechanisms that serve us better is how we can begin to create better emotional health in our lives. When I talk about processing your emotions, you might be wondering, what does processing emotions even mean, or what does that look like? Well, it all starts with awareness. At our house, we have this little wooden board I got when my kids were toddlers that has these two circles with spinners on it. One has these different colored circles with faces portraying different emotions like sad, mad, happy, etc. And the other spinner has pictures of actions to take to help your child cope with the emotion, like go for a walk, ask for a hug, draw a picture, etc. The idea is that you help your young child use the spinners to identify what they are feeling and choose a way to work through that feeling. When our children are young, we teach them to learn how to identify their emotions so that they can find effective ways to handle them. This is not an overnight process. It takes endless practice. And if your kids are anything like mine, by the time we pull out the wood feelings board, they are too dysregulated to even access the thinking part of their brains to do this practice. I've come to realize that many adults, myself included, have these same exact struggles that our children do. We often expect them to be able to identify their feelings and choose appropriate methods to handle them instead of having a tantrum or a meltdown. And yet, how often do we snap at our partner or child when we're feeling overwhelmed? Or tune out whatever negative feeling we're having with a distraction? I want to share a practice with you that I've started doing when I can feel emotions building up inside of me that has been helpful in processing my emotions. It can be done in just a couple minutes or longer if you have time to do so. It looks like this. If you are able to, find someplace quiet and alone and close your eyes. Start by taking a few deep and slow breaths to ground yourself into the present moment. Next, take a moment to focus on what you are feeling. Ask yourself, where do I feel this emotion in my body? Our feelings show up in our physical bodies in a variety of ways. Maybe your chest feels heavy and tight, or your stomach feels off. Often we can feel our blood pressure change when we are feeling highly anxious. Take a moment to locate where you are feeling the emotion. Name the feeling or feelings that you are having. Sometimes I have multiple feelings at once, but I like to pick a word that encompasses all of them if I can. Now that you've named the feeling, instead of pushing it away, create and hold space for it. Take deep, slow breaths as you concentrate on the feeling. Allow yourself to cry, scream, or whatever your body is needing to release the emotion. Remind yourself that you are safe to feel this feeling right now. Remind yourself that emotions aren't permanent and you won't feel like this forever. If you aren't in a place or time where you can do this exercise, try writing down what you're feeling. I like to jot notes down on my phone or leave myself a voice memo to come back to later when you do have the time and space. There will always be seasons in our lives that are more stressful than others. learning tools and implementing practices that help you identify and process stressful emotions in a healthy way can help you avoid burnout. In the book Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski, I might be saying that wrong, I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. They talk about the difference between stress and stressors. Stressors are the things that cause our stress in the first place, like workplace drama, conflict at home, or financial struggles. The stress response is the way our body responds to the stressor. Whether or not we handle the stressor, the thing that is causing our stress, if we don't complete the stress cycle, we hold on to that stress and it has a negative impact on our mental and physical health. So, how do we complete the stress cycle? Well, unfortunately for me, according to Emily and Amelia, the number one most efficient way to complete the stress cycle in our bodies is physical activity. I say unfortunately because consistent physical activity is something that has never come naturally to me. But even jumping up and down, dancing in the kitchen, or a good old cry counts as physical activity that can help complete the stress cycle. There are other ways to complete the stress cycle, though, including breathing, positive social interaction, affection, and creative expression. When we intentionally build these practices into our lives, we are creating rhythms that help ourselves complete the stress cycle and more efficiently handle stress and process our emotions. Learning to create awareness around our emotions and process them in a healthy way doesn't happen overnight. I'm not sharing this information with you because I've perfected processing my emotions in a healthy way. It's something that I'm still working on. And it's something that I think a lot of people, especially mamas with high needs children, struggle with. I'm sharing this with you so that you can start to create more intentional practices to support yourself in your day-to-day life. In the future, I'll be sharing about how our thoughts drive our emotions and how we can manage our thoughts to create positive change in our mental and emotional well-being. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it so much if you would consider rating it, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend that you think might enjoy it. Doing these things will really help the podcast get more visibility so that it can reach and impact more lives. If you found this episode helpful and are interested in learning more about what working with me looks like, I'm currently accepting clients for 2024. I would love to help you make this your best year yet. You can find my contact info in the show notes. See you next week.